أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير الناصرين ثم الصلاة والسلام وتحيته والإكرام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله والصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل إن شاء الله. قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أفمن شرح الله صدره للإسلام فهو على نور من ربه فويل للقاسية قلوبهم من ذكر الله أولئك في ضلال مبين. آمنا به صدق الله العلي العظيم. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters, elders, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Expounding on the topic that we discussed in the introductory nights. The topic that we discussed in the introductory nights was the relationship between the body and the nafs. And we mentioned that because the human being is the makeup of both the physical and the non-physical, it implies that there is a relationship between the two. Because often people would think that because we are physical and we have a non-physical state as well, perhaps the two are mutually exclusive and they have no relationship between the two. But on the contrary, when you refer to the Holy Quran and the ayats of the Holy Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, there is a heavy relationship, there is a strong bond and a link between the physical body and the spiritual soul, the spiritual body of the human being. And we mentioned that because this link exists between the physical and the non-physical, we mentioned that our actions have an impact on our nafs. If you remember the example that we gave, we said that the way we eat food and the way we consume food, the way food has an impact in our body, there are certain things that we do in dunya that has an impact on our nafs as well. If I eat food, I cannot say that there is a particular type of food that if I was to consume it, it would impact my nafs. There are other things which impact my nafs, and those are our actions. That if a person was to engage in certain actions, it strengthens the nafs. Whereas if a person was to engage in certain actions, it weakens the nafs. And we mentioned that the type of action which strengthens the nafs is ibadah. That if a person engages in ibadah, worship towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he worships Allah with ikhlas and niyyah, with sincerity, directing towards Allah and only Allah, then that worship allows the soul to strengthen itself. It becomes strengthened from within. I become strong from within. My nafs becomes formidable from within. When we have this in mind, and just to mention a few words with regards to ibadah, every action that we perform, as Imam Sajjad alayhi salam mentions in Risayat al-Huquq, every action that we perform in dunya has the capacity to become ibadah. As in it's not necessarily that we stand in salah, for example, or we fast during the month of Ramadan, or we go for hajj, or ziyarah, or Quran, tilawat al-Quran, that these are constituted as ibadah. No, ibadah, every action that I perform in my life, from the moment I wake up to the moment I sleep, even my sleep has the potential to become ibadah. There are certain actions which are considered to be mubah in itself. What's the meaning of mubah? Mubah is that it has no reward and no punishment. There are many things in our lives that if we were to act on them, they have no reward and no punishment. Eating and drinking, for example. If I was to eat a meal, I cannot say that there is thawab in me eating this particular meal. But if I eat it with the intention of qurbatan ilallah, if I eat a particular meal to say that this meal will give me the energy to stand for Salat al-Layl, or to allow me to, for example, recite my salah, or for example, it allows me to help the mu'mineen in the mosque, to be at their service, it becomes ibadah, and there is reward for it. Likewise, if I sleep during the night time in the state of tahara. Although my akal is removed from me, although I am unconscious in the state of sleeping, it becomes ibadah. That I say to myself, I am sleeping, Ya Allah, with the intention that when I wake up, I will have the energy to worship you. All of a sudden, this sleep, which has no reward and punishment, becomes ibadah, becomes the manifestations of worship, and then there is reward for it for the human being. We, as human beings, have the capacity to be in the state of ibadah throughout our entire lives. They say there was one scholar, Sahib al-Jawahir al one of the scholars, he begins to, in his research, he says that one time in my studies in the Hausa, he says, I took on the responsibility to go through all of the sources that we have. The hadith that we have, I took on the responsibilities to read through all of the narrations that we have from the Ahlul Bayt and list all of the mustahabbat that we have. He said the number that I reached up to was over 250,000. That's 250,000 mustahabbat that we have within the religion of Islam. He said, it's an amazing discussion this is, that the human being has the potential to encourage himself and be in the state of ibadah at any moment in his life. And this is the state of the mu'min, that he is in the constant state of ibadah, that we have so many different types of ibadah. It's not necessarily praying and fasting and going for hajj and so on and so forth. Our ibadahs are not restricted to the furu' ad-din. In fact, there are fractions or there are branches of the usul ad-din that we can adhere to. And there are over 250,000 of this. In one narration, for example, it says, it's a beautiful narration. They say when Imam al-Qadim salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, when he was in prison by Harun al-Rashid, they say one night he stood for prayers. Not wajib, nafila. He stood for prayers which are mustahab. He stood for prayers. The hadith says, اغتم. He became sad. He became sorrowful. فَتَرَكَ الصَّلَاةِ. And he left his salah. The scholars, when they begin to examine this hadith, some of us, the love that we have for the Ahlul Bayt, will come and question the authority of this hadith. How can the Imam alayhi salam leave something which is mustahab? Yes, the Imam alayhi salam is a man of worship. All of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, they used to engage in worship. They used to stand during the night, 1,000 raka'at during the night time, every night. We believe in this. But this particular hadith, what does it say? اختم فترك الصلاة. He was sorrowful. He became sad, so he left his salah. The scholars came forward and they said, look, it says he left salah. It doesn't say he left ibadah. It means that the Imam alayhi salam redirected his form of ibadah from one mustahab to the other mustahab. Sometimes, for example, it's hard for us to perform a particular mustahabbat. Yes, it's hard for us to sit and to recite the Holy Quran. For some of us, it becomes a nuisance for us to recite the Holy Quran. Yes, when we recite the Holy Quran, we come through 3-4 lines, we recite a page, 2 pages, 3 pages, then it becomes heavy on us. It becomes very heavy on us. This is, according to the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt, this is known as what? Iqbal and Adbar. That at times when we feel like worshipping Allah, we worship Allah. We do all the mustahabbats that we can do. But if we're in the state of idbar, where, for example, we do not feel like doing ibadah, then what do? We stick to the wajibat. Because if we encourage ourselves and force ourselves to do the mustahabbat, we can reach a level where it becomes annoyance for us. It becomes an annoyance for us. To the extent that if I force myself to recite 1 hour of Quran every day, if I force myself, for example, to recite Salat al-Layl every single day, when at times it becomes very difficult on me, the ulama explain that one should not force themselves to perform the mustahabbat. Because when you force yourself to do something you do not want to do, a time will come when you will start to despise it. A time will come when you will hate it. And then after that, you will leave it altogether. So when a person is in a state of idbar, when he is not capable of performing the mustahabbat, then he should restrict himself in performing the wajibat. And this is how we progress spiritually. We mentioned this morning that towards the end of the sermon of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, towards the end of the sermon of the month of Ramadan, which he delivers in the last Friday of Sha'aban, what does he say? Amir al-Mu'mineen asks a question. He says, Ya Rasulullah, which a'mal are considered to be the best of a'mal in the month of Ramadan? Rasulullah replies, he says, Al-wara anil maharimillah, to refrain from that which is haram. Scholars came forward and explained that to refrain from haram is at times better than performing ibadah. We may come towards the month of Ramadan. We have a week left. Time has passed, and time has passed very quickly. We may say to ourselves, we may look inwardly, and we may be in a state of regret that 3 weeks have passed and I have not encouraged myself in many ibadat. They say sahih, yes, but make sure what is greater than performing ibadat is that one refrains from performing actions which are considered to be sins. When a person refrains from sins, at times it can be better than the effects of performing ibadat. Because when a person refrains from sins, this is considered to be ibadah in itself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The idea is that when a person performs ibadah, it has the capacity to strengthen his nafs. It strengthens his nafs from within. It becomes strong. It becomes healthy. The way when I, for example, eat healthy food, my body becomes strong and healthy. Likewise, when I encourage myself in ibadah, my nafs becomes healthy and strong. Someone may come and ask the question, why is it that when I perform actions when I perform them, they're physical, but at the same time they have a spiritual effect? Something which is spiritual is non-physical. So how can something physical have an effect on something which is non-physical? The Quran talks about this. The Quran refers to this reality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully describes the effects of certain actions. When He speaks about Sawm, for example, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. What is the hadaf? What is the purpose of fasting? The purpose of fasting is that a person reaches the stages of taqwa. Is taqwa physical? Taqwa is a spiritual effect, but it comes from a physical action. When I refrain from eating, drinking, relationships with our spouses, for example, all of this has a spiritual effect. Something which is physical brings about a spiritual effect. You find, for example, when it talks about salah, salah is a physical action. When I stand on the mihrab, for example, when I perform ruku, sujud, tashahud, taslim, alhamd, for example, takbirat al-ihram, all of these are different actions put together, combined, makes up what is known as salah. But then there is a spiritual action, there is a spiritual effect that is brought forth by this physical action. Inna as-salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. It gives me the power to refrain from that which is evil and that which is bad. You find, for example, according to the narration of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. He explains, he says, as-salat al-ma'raj al-mu'min, that salah is the ascension of the human being. What does that mean, ascension of the human being? Is that physical? Physical ascension? Do we ascend towards the heavens physically? No, it is the spiritual ascension. But that comes about from our physical act, which is salah. You talk about dhikr Allah. What is dhikr Allah? Dhikr Allah is not when I just sit on the musalla reciting Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, for example, La ilaha illallah. All of these are different forms of dhikr. But the recitation of the Holy Quran is considered to be dhikr. Salah is considered to be dhikr. Anything that makes me remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is considered to be dhikr of Allah. Yet you find within the Holy Quran, Ala bi dhikrillahi tutma'innal qulub, tatma'innul qulub. Is it not through the dhikr of Allah that the heart is what reaches the stage of itmi'nan, that it brings serenity in my heart, it makes me strong and firm from within? The dhikr of Allah is a physical act, but it brings about a spiritual effect, which is what? It brings about serenity in my heart. It makes me happy in dunya. It removes unhappiness. It removes misery from my life. It makes me content with what I have. So you find all of these realities explain that when I perform a particular action, I directly tap into the world of the unseen. I tap into the spiritual world and I take benefits from those spiritual worlds. And I take those benefits from that world and it is applied in my life as well. Likewise, when a person engages in sin, when a person distances himself from the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it damages the nafs from within. Just as how if I was to, for example, starve my body, if I disengage myself from the remembrance of Allah, or I disengage myself from the ibadah of Allah, it in turn begins to starve my nafs. My nafs begins to die. my nafs begins to fall apart, it begins to disintegrate. وَمَنْ يَعْرَضْ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. That the one who refuses the dhikr of Allah, disengages, distances himself. Or for example, a person who deters from the remembrance of Allah, Allah says that his life will become a life of dhanka. His life will become a life of misery. This is all spiritual effects from a person who refuses to perform ibadah. And therefore you come towards the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt. When they talk about the diseases of the nafs, the diseases of the nafs are many mentioned within the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt. You find, for example, when these diseases accumulate within our hearts, it begins to destroy our nafs. We don't feel it. We feel it in our suluk. We feel it in the way we live. You look at the world today, this world is filled with spiritual vices. And yet at the same time, people are suffering from within. People are unhappy. Suicide rates are on the high. Yes, they're escalating every year by year. The numbers are astonishing. Yet you find materialistically they're doing very well for themselves. Yes, you take for example a person who suffers from jealousy. Jealousy is a spiritual vice. A person who is jealous begins to kill himself from within. He always compares himself with someone else. We have certain Shia communities in the world. Yes, where for example if a person was to move into a 3-bedroom house, you'll find one other person moves into a 4-bedroom house. Yes, there's always that competition materialistically. If my neighbor buys a car, I need to buy a model better than his car. This material competition that creates jealousy, that begets jealousy, is something that destroys the human being. And the idea behind this is that just how my body becomes sick, my nafs can also become sick. When I have a pain in my abdomen, or if I have pain in my ear, or in my tooth, or in my eye, I have pain in the smallest organ of my body, in my body. It troubles me. It makes me uncomfortable. I lose my sleep. I cannot eat. I cannot have fun. I cannot enjoy the simple pleasures of life. Likewise, if I have a disease of the soul, it does the same impact. It makes me very uncomfortable. It makes me live in a way that I do not want to live. Yes, it kills me from within. Jealousy is one of these examples. Su'adhan is another example where a person is constantly thinking bad of others. Constantly he thinks bad of others. As in, which person in dunya can progress when he suffers from su'adhan? He, for example, spreads rumors about others in the community. He sees one person somewhere, for example, all of a sudden it begets rumors that this person was seen in this particular location, therefore he was doing fulan, he was doing fulan, he was doing fulan. Yes? This person was seen in a bar, for example, all of a sudden he's an alcoholic. Baba, he could have, for example, used the phone in the bar. Or, for example, he may have gone to take one of his brothers out the bar. Yes? This person, you find, for example, when he suffers from su'adhan, he's always there on his tip, he's always there on his toes, promoting and encouraging rumors, doing ghibah of others within the community, creating lies and concoctions in the lives of others. What this does is this begets distrust within the community. This creates distrust within the community. Yes, people cannot trust one another. Imagine living a life where people cannot trust one another. If you have a business where you cannot trust your partners, can that business be successful? A community like this, if people are not willing to trust one another, there will be no progression within the community. These are effects of the spiritual soul. But there is one spiritual disease that is greater and considered to be the mother of all diseases, which is what? Which is known as qaswat al-qalb. When the heart becomes hardened. It's known as the hardening of the heart. The idea behind this is that the human being reaches a stage in his life where his heart becomes hard to the extent that it begins to affect him in his life. When you have a number of people who suffer from the hardening of the heart, this creates what? This creates dissension within the community. This creates fasad. This creates fitna. It destroys communities. It destroys families. It destroys communities. You look at, for example, in the Holy Quran. In the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt. Wonderful hadith. A hadith that every scholar touches upon in this particular discussion. Where the Imam alayhi salam, some have said that this is associated with Imam al-Baqir, some have said This is associated according to the words of Imam Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhima. That when a person, for example, engages in a sin, when a person commits a sin, a black dot penetrates his heart. When he engages in a different sin or in another sin, that black dot, another black dot penetrates the heart. Third sin, a third black dot. To the extent that the entire heart becomes blackened. The entire heart becomes bleak. It becomes dark. Not physically, spiritually, it becomes dark. There's no nur. This heart is a heart of dhulma, is a heart which is distant from the remembrance of Allah. This person has made it his choice to deter himself from Allah and to join the companions of shayateen and shaitan. This person has been removed. He's removed himself from being associated with the Ahlul Bayt, associated with guidance, and he has purposely allowed himself to be misguided. When the heart reaches the stage of qaswat al-qalb, in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses this. He says there are 4 stages of qaswat al-qalb. Look how low the human being can stoop. Look how low the human being can fall. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُمْ أَسْفَلَ السَّافِلِينَ. Look how low the human being can reach. In one verse, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the human being لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا, that they have a heart, they have a mind, but they cannot process information using this mind. They cannot think using this mind. Information is given to them, but they cannot interact with that information. Yes, لَهُمْ أَعْيُنْ فَلَا يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا وَلَا يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا. They have eyes, but they cannot see. What does that mean, they have eyes, but they cannot see? They have eyes, we can see materialistically. Yes, we can see what is between us, what is in front of us. But we cannot see the certain realities that when knowledge is given to them, when you show these people, this is the truth, this is the haqq, they will not be able to interact with that knowledge. They will not be able to see the truth. وَلَهُمْ آذَانٌ لَا يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا. They have ears, but they cannot listen. There are people like this in the world. When you engage with them in debates and discussions, you speak to them, you give them information and knowledge, but they are not willing to accept that knowledge. Yes? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أُولَٰئِكَ كَأَنْعَامٍ كَالْأَنْعَامِ. They are like animals. They are like the baha'im of this world. They are like the beasts of this world. What does the hadith say? The hadith says that the human being is a creation so powerful that if it wishes, it can ascend. It can reach the highest stations of reality, far greater than the loftiest of angels. But at the same time, he can stoop so low, he can stoop below the animals or the stages of the animals. أُولَٰئِكَ كَالْأَنْعَامِ. They are like animals. Animals do not have the power of aql. Animals cannot think. Animals cannot respond and reciprocate with knowledge. بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلْ. They are worse than animals. That we have the aql, but we have chosen ourselves to what? Distance ourselves from this aql. To choose not to use our aql in our lives. In another verse, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُكُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ فَهِيَ كَالْحِجَارَةِ. A state that a human being becomes worse than the animals is which state? They become like rocks. You know what's beautiful is the story that's mentioned before this ayah. The story is of which story? The story of the cow in Surah Al-Baqarah. We all know the story, yes? When they say there was a youth who was murdered by his 2 brothers, they say there was a woman, a beautiful woman, a very intellectual, wise, a very God-fearing woman who used to veil herself and observe hijab. This woman was wanted by many men in the community. They wanted to marry her. They say that she had an uncle, she had 3 cousins from her uncle. 2 of her cousins, all 3 of them wanted to marry this woman, but one of her cousins was considered to be a muttaqi. He was considered to be a pious person. So she decided to marry this one cousin. The 2 brothers became jealous. So what did they do? They invited him for dinner. They called him for da'wat. When he came to their house for dinner, they plotted against him. They killed him. When they killed him, they dumped his body somewhere. The next morning, they came towards Nabi Musa alayhi salam. They took the dirt from the ground and they began throwing it in their heads. It's a sign of musibah. They said, "Oh Musa, we want what? We want justice. Our brother has been murdered." Nabi Musa comes to the tribes, the 12 tribes. He says, "Which from amongst you has killed this youth?" The people came towards him and said, "Ya Nabi Musa, Ya Musa, none of us have killed him, and we do not know who the killer is. Perhaps you should seek guidance from Allah to reveal to us who the killer is. Allah reveals the verse. Nabi Musa turns to Allah. He says, Ya Allah, who is the killer? Show us who the killer is. What does Allah say? Allah says, O Musa, tell your people to slaughter a cow. Musa passes the message on. Slaughter a cow. Musa, are you joking with us? That we should slaughter a cow and we should take a meat from this cow, we should take a part from this cow and slap it on and hit the body of the youth, and the youth will come back to life? Is this a joke, Musa? Musa says, A'udhu billahi. He says, A'udhu billah. He says, this is the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Slaughter a cow. He says, Musa, which type of cow? He says, slaughter a cow that is not old nor young. Slaughter a cow that is middle-aged. Says, Musa, which qualities should this cow have? One questions after another, yes? There's a reason why Allah says, ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُكُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ. There's a reason why your hearts have become hard. Because they used to deny the prophethood of Nabi Musa. Yes, they used to constantly cause trouble for him. They used to challenge him. They used to question him. Musa, give us the qualities of these cows. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals it, says that this cow should be free from defect. This cow should not be, for example, a trained cow, that it plows the land and it waters the fields. This cow should be free of any defects and deficiencies. This cow should be what? Perfect. It should be yellow, not too dark, not too light. All of these qualities came in one after another, to the extent that there was only one cow in the community, and the price of that cow was very expensive. They came to Nabi Musa, they said, Musa, we found the cow, but it's very expensive. What should we do? He says, this is the order of Allah. You want to know who the killer is? Slaughter that cow. Pay for it, slaughter it. If you had just followed the simple order of slaughtering a cow, things would have been very much easy for you. So they slaughtered the cow. When they slapped, when they hit the meat of the cow onto the body raised back to life and said, O Musa, these two brothers of mine killed me. Then the verse says, ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُكُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ. Now your hearts have become hardened. Yes, this is a powerful message for each and every one of us. How many times have I heard when people come forward and said, you live in this particular part of the world, or you live in this area of the world, a very spiritual part, a very spiritual place. MashaAllah, you should be, you're very lucky living in Qom, or in Najaf, or in Karbala, or in Mashhad. I said, but problems exist everywhere. Yes. We have problems living in the UK. There are problems living in these areas of the world. Yes, the problems may not be the same, but problems do exist. The grass is always greener on the other side, isn't it? When we read the books of history, we love the Imams to the extent that we say, Ya laytana kunna ma'akum, that we wish that we lived with you. As what does that mean, that we wished we lived with the Imam? Imagine living with the Prophet. Imagine living with Amir al-Mu'mineen. To be able to discuss with them, to be able to sit with them, to be able to interact with them, to communicate with them. This is a pleasure. This is something that the mu'mineen yearn for in Jannah, to be in the presence of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. But at the same time, the people of their communities were very challenging. They challenged the Imams and the authorities of the Imams. A minority of the people in history used to follow the Prophets. The majority turned against them. The majority turned against them. Just because they used to live in the time of the Prophet does not mean that they used to be religious people. Look at the Bani Israel. How many miracles did they witness, one after the other? They, for example, saw the splitting of the Red Seas. They were slaves of Fir'aun. They saw Fir'aun's demise. They were freed. Then they saw the splitting of the Red Seas. Then the 12 springs that came from the ground. Then they saw this child being raised back to life, or this young lad being raised back to life. One miracle after another. And constantly they would turn to Nabi Musa alayhi salam and they would say, Musa. They used to challenge him. They used to question his prophethood. Yet, after witnessing miracles after miracles after miracles. And this is a message for each and every one of us, that our belief in our theology does not come with what? With the presence of the Imam being with us. It comes with our love for them. It comes with our knowledge that we gain about them. That creates that love, that creates that ita'ah for the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When a person suffers from qaswat al-qalb, life becomes a misery for them. Life becomes a burden on them. The greatest of barakah, the greatest of ni'mah that Allah has given us is existence, is life. But that becomes a burden. And people wish to free themselves from this burden. So what happens? They turn to extreme measures to try and free themselves from this particular burden. The burden of life. This is the state that a person reaches when he reaches the stage of qaswatul qalb. Now I may, for example, suffer from qaswatul qalb. The Quran focuses on these areas. The riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt warn us of the damaging effects of qaswatul qalb. Question is put forward, how do I know that I am not suffering from qaswatul qalb? This question was raised by the Imams alayhim salam as well. Ya Imam, how do we know that we don't suffer from qaswatul qalb? When the ulama were asked this question, they said, here is the place that we go, here is the time, this is the time that we go refer to the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt. Look what the Imams have said about qaswatul qalb. Look at the symptoms of qaswatul qalb. It's amazing, isn't it? When a person is sick, we go running to the doctors. What does the doctor do? The doctor asks us questions, one after another. What is your illness? What is your symptoms? What are your symptoms? He identifies, he pinpoints the symptoms so that he can identify what the illness is. Here we know what the illness is. The illness is qaswatul qalb, the hardness of the heart. But what are the symptoms for the hardness of the heart? The symptoms, as mentioned by the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt, by the mouth of the Ahl al-Bayt, is what? Number one, the first symptom is that the person cannot cry. Yes, a person, the tears cannot flow from his eyes. This is one of the symptoms of qaswatul qalb. That when we attend the majalis al-Husayniyah, when we sit and cry, when we see the people around us crying and crying for Abu Abdullah and his companions and his sons and his women folk, we cannot cry. This is one of the symptoms of qaswatul qalb. A second symptom of qaswatul qalb, the love for the world. We have, mashallah, many businesses, many successful businesses, and we wish to spend hours upon hours in our offices. We spend 15, 16 hours in our offices trying to establish a multi-million-dollar business, yes, to establish connections. We're more willing to spend time with our business partners than spending time with our wives and our sons. I spend 15 hours in the office. My wife is at home waiting for me. My children are home waiting for me. My priority is not my work. My priority is my family. I work to support my family, not to work to establish a name for myself. To raise a family is the greatest ni'mah that Allah has given us. There are many people in the world who, for example, do not have families. It's difficult for them to have children. We have been given children, yet we neglect their right. And we focus on things which are not a priority for us in dunya. So you find the second symptoms of qaswatul qalb is when a person focuses on dunya and the affairs of dunya, on materialism. He focuses on what? Running behind the world. And as the Imam beautifully says, when you run behind the world runs away from you. But when you run away from the world runs after you. Yes? The third symptom of qaswatul qalb is what? When I come to the masjid, when I listen to the Maulana talk about the religion of Islam, it becomes a nuisance for me. It becomes heavy on me, on my heart. Yes, I come for Jumu'ah, I come on a Thursday night. Maulana is talking about the fires of hell, the adhab of akhirah, the uquba, for example, or the pleasures of heaven, or the fadail of the Ahl al-Bayt. Everything in its own time. Yes, everything in its own time. But this person, whenever he comes to the mosque, he switches off. He cannot take it anymore. He can't take being taught about Islam. It becomes a burden on him. It becomes a burden on him, and he cannot interact with that knowledge. He cannot apply that knowledge in his life. This is one of the symptoms of qaswatul qalb, to the extent that he begins to leave the mosque. Yes, he no longer comes to the mosque anymore. One of the symptoms of qaswatul qalb is what? That people do not come to the masjid or the Husayniyah. One of the things that will complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment is what? The masjid where salah was abandoned. People did not come for salah. One of the best ways to counter qaswatul qalb is attendance in the Husayniyah, is for people to come and to engage interactively. Yes, to engage in Islamic discussions. This is what brings about the melting of qaswatul qalb, the hardness of the heart. But this is a responsibility, not my responsibility. Yes, it's not my responsibility. People ask me, Maulana, how will you bring the youth back to the mosque? There's only something that I can do. This is a responsibility that is shared by both parties. I will do what is recommended and required from me, but you also have the responsibility to take it upon yourself to make the effort to come to the mosque. This is a responsibility shared by both parties, not just one party. Yes? And of course, there are many other symptoms of qaswat al-qalb, and we need to be wary of these symptoms because these are things that can enter our lives without us knowing about them. At times, a sin introduces itself blatantly in front of us. It knocks the front doors and it enters the house. Sometimes the sin enters through the windows. Sometimes it enters through the cracks of the doors, yes, and the cracks of the walls. And when it enters the house, it accumulates within the house and it destroys the house from within. It enters our hearts through the cracks in our personalities. It accumulates, it builds up, and it destroys us from within. That's why tomorrow, inshallah, I'll discuss one of the greatest method or form of ibadah that we can utilize in our lives that combats, that counteracts the effects of qaswat al-qalb. It's an effect, it's a thing, it's an ibadah that we engage on a daily basis, something that we can do on a daily basis, something that we can interact with, things that we have within our houses, something that is very beneficial for us, inshallah. That's for tomorrow, inshallah. وآخر الدعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على